Welcome to The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Thursday, July the 30th, 2020.
As a little child, I tasted the bitter fruits of racism, and I didn't like it. I didn't like seeing those signs. I didn't like when I went to the theater. All of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony, and all the little white children went downstairs to the first floor. I would come home and ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why? They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But one day in 1955, 15 years old, in the 10th grade, I heard about Rosa Parks. I heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on old radio. The action of Rosa Parks, the words and leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. inspired me to find a way to get in the way. And I got in trouble. Good trouble. Necessary trouble. As a student in college, we studied the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. We studied what Gandhi attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India. We studied Thoreau and civil disobedience. We studied the great religions of the world. And Andrew Eisen would tell you in book one, March book one, we start sitting in, black and white college students, black and white high school students. Be sitting there in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion, waiting to be served. And someone would come up and spit on us. They'll put a lighted cigarette out in our hair or down our backs, pour hot water, hot coffee or hot chocolate on us, pull us off the lunch counter stools. We were orderly, peaceful. Many of us accepted nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. But we were charged with disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace. We got arrested. I went to jail the first time on February 27, 1960. Between 1960 and 1966, I was arrested and jailed 40 times for sitting in, for going on a freedom ride, marching for the right to vote, beaten at a Greyhound bus station in South Carolina, beaten at the Greyhound bus station in Montgomery, Alabama, and left bloody and unconscious. Beaten, having a concussion on that bridge in Selma, Alabama on March 7, 1965, a day that became known as Bloody Sunday. But I never became bitter or hostile, never gave up. I never gave in. I kept the faith, and during all these many years, I've tried to keep my eyes on the prize. March, book one. Tell a story of a group of people who stood up together, rested together, beaten together, and jailed together. Some of my friends didn't make it. They died. Today, this year, we celebrated, just a few weeks ago, the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. Back in 1963, August 28, 1963, I was the youngest speaker to March on Washington. And out of the 10 people that spoke that day, I'm the only one still around. So as we write book 2 and book 3, we would tell the whole story, the complete story of a people, of a struggle to make America different, to make America better, and create what we call one people, one family, one house. Because in America, we all live in the same house, the American house. And it doesn't matter whether we are black or white, Latino or Asian American or Native American. On this little planet, this little spaceship that we call Earth, we must learn to live together, as Dr. King would say, or we will perish as fools. Can I give up? Can I give in? Can I become bitter or hostile? We have to march on with hope, with faith, and with love.
That was Congressman John Lewis in 2013 at the National Constitution Center. He was at the time speaking about his book, March, Book 1, that he had written and had also assistance with. Right? Andrew Aden was his co-author on that book. Those words from John Lewis 7 years ago ring profoundly deep and true today. The day that John Lewis was funeralized and laid to rest in Atlanta, Georgia. When I return on this episode of The Politicrat, reading the last written words of John Lewis, American icon, human rights leader, congressman, hero, patriot, freedom fighter, justice seeker. Welcome back. John Lewis was funeralized today in Atlanta, Georgia. He was a congressman in Atlanta, Georgia. Certainly that was part of his district. He was known to those who loved him and knew him the best as the boy from Troy. John Lewis was really Robert Lewis. Robert was his first name, and then was given the name John as he ascended through the activist movement. John Robert Lewis died on July the 17th, 2020 at the age of 80. John Lewis, a human being who epitomized sacrifice, service, education, activism, peace, nonviolence, love, and the pursuit of justice. He was not only the conscience of the Congress, he was the conscience of the nation. John Lewis, just before he passed, wrote a letter, an open letter really, an opinion piece for the New York Times, designed to be published on the day of his being laid to rest for eternity. There were great tributes to John Lewis today. 3 American presidents spoke, and spoke with love and candor and a mission for us all. Others spoke too at the Ebenezer Baptist Church today. But I think that this opinion piece that John Lewis wrote for the New York Times, specially to be published on the day that he was being laid to rest. This day, his funeral. I think these words are the ones that you should hear. And now I'm going to read to you the final public written words of John Robert Lewis. The title of this is called Together, You Can Redeem the Soul of Our Nation. July the 30th, 2020. John Lewis. While my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people, motivated simply by human compassion, laid down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. That is why I had to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, though I was admitted to the hospital the following day. I just had to see and feel it for myself that after many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never, ever forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Though I was surrounded by two loving parents, plenty of sisters, brothers, and cousins, their love could not protect me from the unholy oppression waiting just outside that family circle. Unchecked, unrestrained violence and government-sanctioned terror had the power to turn a simple stroll to the store for some Skittles or an innocent morning jog down a lonesome country road into a nightmare. If we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shoot unwitting concert goers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said we are all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He said it is not enough to say it will get better by and by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we called the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful, nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study history and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change, and that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now, it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. Welcome back. My message now is to take heed of those words that you just heard. The words that I just read from John Lewis himself, his final publicly published words that appeared in today's New York Times. I will be providing a link to that op-ed that I really urge you to read as well. And it was moving to read those words because this is a day to celebrate, but really to mourn as well. Because although John Lewis is going home, that doesn't mean that we have to go home. We must make sure that we vote this November, whether it is by mail, and we have to follow up and make sure that the mail is not delayed. We have to keep fighting in the spirit of John Lewis. What I'm going to do next is play you a portion of the eulogy by President Barack Obama of John Lewis today at the Ebenezer Baptist Church during the funeral of John Lewis. This is, I guess, roughly 10 minutes or so long, but it's a really important 10 minutes plus. This is the portion of the eulogy that I thought was very impactful, urgent, moving, important, and a call to all of us who want to see this nation be better than it presently is. People who want to see a semblance of decency restored to this country. This was a call to action today in honoring John Lewis. And now, without any other further ado, for the next few minutes, listen carefully to this very important eulogy, a portion of the eulogy. This is President Barack Obama today eulogizing John Lewis during his funeral at the Ebenezer Baptist Church.
So many of us lose that sense. It's taught out of us. We start feeling as if, in fact, we can't afford to extend kindness or decency to other people. That we're better off if we're above other people and looking down on them. And so often that's encouraged in our culture. But John always said, he always saw the best in us. And he never gave up and never stopped speaking out because he saw the best in us. He believed in us even when we didn't believe in ourselves. And as a congressman, he didn't rest. He kept getting himself arrested. As an old man, he didn't sit out any fight. Sat in all night long on the floor of the United States Capitol. I know his staff was stressed. But the testing of his faith produced perseverance. He knew that the march is not over, that the race is not yet won, that we have not yet reached that blessed destination where we are judged by the content of our character. He knew from his own life that progress is fragile, that we have to be vigilant against the darker currents of this country's history, of our own history, with their whirlpools of violence and hatred and despair that can always rise again. Bull Connor may be gone, but today we witness with our own eyes police officers kneeling on the necks of Black Americans. George Wallace may be gone, but we can witness our federal government sending agents to use tear gas and batons against peaceful demonstrators. We may no longer have to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to cast a ballot. But even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick. Now, I know this is a celebration of John's life. There are some who might say we shouldn't dwell on such things. But that's why I'm talking about it. John Lewis devoted his time on this earth fighting the very attacks on democracy and what's best in America that we're seeing circulate right now. He knew that every single one of us has a God-given power, and that the fate of this democracy depends on how we use it. That democracy isn't automatic. It has to be nurtured. It has to be tended to. We have to work at it. It's hard. And so he knew that it depends on whether we summon just a measure of John's moral courage to question what's right and what's wrong and call things as they are. He said that as long as he had a breath in his body, he would do everything he could to preserve this democracy. And as long as we have breath in our bodies, we have to continue his cause. If we want our children to grow up in a democracy, not just with elections, but a true democracy, a representative democracy, in a big-hearted, tolerant, vibrant, inclusive America of perpetual self-creation, then we're going to have to be more like John. We don't have to do all the things he had to do because he did them for us. But we got to do something. As the Lord instructed Paul, do not be afraid. Go on speaking. Do not be silent, for I am with you. And no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people. It's just, everybody's got to come out and vote. We got all those people in the city, but they can't do nothing. Like John, we've got to keep getting into that good trouble. He knew that nonviolent protest is patriotic, a way to raise public awareness and put a spotlight on injustice and make the powers that be uncomfortable. Like John, we don't have to choose between protests and politics. It's not an either-or situation. It's a both-and situation. We have to engage in protests where that's effective, but we also have to translate our passion and our causes into laws, institutional practices. That's why John ran for Congress 34 years ago. Like John, we've got to fight even harder for the most powerful tool that we have, which is the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act is one of the crowning achievements of our democracy. It's why John crossed that bridge. It's why he spilled his blood. And by the way, it was the result of Democratic and Republican efforts. President Bush, who spoke here earlier, and his father signed its renewal when they were in office. President Clinton didn't have to because it was the law when he arrived. So instead, he made a law to make it easier for people to register to vote. – But once the Supreme Court weakened the Voting Rights Act, some state legislators unleashed a flood of laws designed specifically to make voting harder, especially, by the way, state legislators where there's a lot of minority turnout and population growth. That's not necessarily a mystery or an accident. It was an attack on what John fought for. It was an attack on our democratic freedoms. And we should treat it as such. If politicians want to honor John, and I'm so grateful for the legacy and work of all the congressional leaders who are here, but there's a better way than a statement calling him a hero. Right. You want to honor John? Let's honor him by revitalizing the law that he was willing to die for. And by the way, naming it the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, that is a fine tribute. But John wouldn't want us to stop there, just trying to get back to where we already were. Once we pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, we should keep marching to make it even better by making sure every American is automatically registered to vote, including former inmates who've earned their second chance. By adding polling places and expanding early voting and making Election Day a national holiday. So if you are somebody who's working in a factory, or you're a single mom who's got to go to her job and doesn't get time off, you can still cast your ballot by guaranteeing that every American citizen has equal representation in our government, including the American citizens who live in Washington, D.C. and in Puerto Rico. They're Americans. By ending some of the partisan gerrymandering so that all voters have the power to choose their politicians, not the other way around. And if all this takes eliminating the filibuster, another Jim Crow relic, in order to secure the God-given rights of every American, then that's what we should do. Now, even if we do all this, even if every bogus voter suppression law is struck off the books today, we've got to be honest with ourselves that too many of us choose not to exercise the franchise. Too many of our citizens believe their vote won't make a difference, or they buy into the cynicism that, by the way, is the central strategy of voter suppression, to make you discouraged, to stop believing in your own power. So we're also going to have to remember what John said. If you don't do everything you can do to change things, then they will remain the same. You only pass this way once. You have to give it all you have. As long as young people are protesting in the streets, hoping real change takes hold, I'm hopeful, but we can't casually abandon them at the ballot box. Not when few elections have been as urgent on so many levels as this one. We can't treat voting as an errand to run if we have some time. We have to treat it as the most important action we can take on behalf of democracy. And like John, we have to give it all we have. I was proud that John Lewis was a friend of mine. I met him when I was in law school. He came to speak. And I went up and I said, Mr. Lewis, you are one of my heroes. What inspired me more than anything as a young man was to see what you and Reverend Lawson, Bob Moses, and Diane Nash, and others did. And he got that kind of, aw shucks, thank you very much. Next time I saw him, I'd been elected to the United States Senate. And I told him, John, I'm here because of you. And on Inauguration Day in 2009, he was one of the first people I greeted and hugged on that stand. And I told him, this is your day too. He was a good and kind and gentle man. And he believed in us, even when we don't believe in ourselves. And it's fitting that the last time John and I shared a public forum was on Zoom. And I'm pretty sure neither he nor I set up the Zoom call because we didn't know how to work it. There's a virtual town hall with a gathering of young activists who had been helping to lead this summer's demonstrations in the wake of George Floyd's death. And afterwards, I spoke to John privately, and he could not have been prouder to see this new generation of activists standing up for freedom and equality, a new generation that was intent on voting and protecting the right to vote. In some cases, a new generation running for political office. And I told him, all those young people, John, of every race and every religion, from every background and gender and sexual orientation, John, those are your children. They learned from your example, even if they didn't always know it. They had understood through him what American citizenship requires, even if they'd only heard about his courage through the history books. By the thousands, faceless, anonymous, relentless young people, black and white, have taken our whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Dr. King said that in the 1960s, and it came true again this summer. We see it outside our windows in big cities and rural towns, in men and women, young and old, straight Americans and LGBTQ Americans, blacks who long for equal treatment, and whites who can no longer accept freedom for themselves while witnessing the subjugation of their fellow Americans.
That was President Barack Obama speaking today, eulogizing John Lewis at his funeral at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. John Lewis was laid to rest today. We must vote, whether it is by mail in a pandemic that still rages out of control, especially here in the United States of America. We must vote, whether that is in person, early voting, which I recommend and I've talked about here. Early voting, with, of course, your mask and everything else. Physical distancing, I think, is ultimately the best way. At least 38 states, if not more, have early voting. And if you are someone who is able to, if you are someone who can, if you are someone who wants to, I would truly urge you to early vote. And do so, of course, at your local polling station or whichever polling station is open prior to November 3rd. Because I guarantee you there are going to be many people, many people who want to vote and who will vote on November 3rd, if not before that. There will be lots of people who will still come to the polls. There will be many millions of people who will vote by mail. But there will be people who will come to the polls on November 3rd. And if you vote early, you will find, guaranteed, that the lines and the crowds will be far less. The earlier you vote, the better. As I said, at least 38 states in this country have early voting. What I want to say to John Lewis at the moment, as he's laid to rest: farewell, good sir. Go gently now. You've more than earned your rest. You've done your part. You've done it in abundance. Thank you so much, John Lewis, for teaching, for activating, for doing, for being. I promise I will do my part. I promise I will, daily. Tears, prayers, #good trouble. That's a tweet that I sent out earlier today at the Popcorn REEL. This is a day to celebrate, but it's a day to mourn. And it's a sad day. But it's a day for us to resolve to act, to vote, to keep standing up when you see evil and you see wrongdoing all around you, whether it's on television or right in front of your eyes in your city. Stand up, speak out, speak up, just like John Lewis did. Do it in your way, in your own way. We all can do something. We don't have to do everything. We don't have to do what John Lewis did, but we have to do something. When I return, in the spirit of John Lewis, I'm going to talk about 2 more states and the voting in those states, what voters in Florida and indeed, appropriately, Georgia have to do. Next. Welcome back. Just before I get to Florida and Georgia, the next 2 states on the list of 50 states and the District of Columbia that I have been talking about in terms of the websites you need to go to and what you need to know on a preliminary basis for this November, I want to mention that on this day of all days, and it's not by accident, the you-know-who in the White House was talking about, floating the idea at least, of delaying the November 3rd presidential election. And at least 3 prominent Republicans have pushed back and have absolutely said, we're not going for this. No, we're going to have an election on November 3rd. In fact, we've had at least at this moment 6 or 7 Republicans have come out publicly and said, no, this is not going to move. We've had elections, basically come hell or high water during the Civil War, during crises. This is not going to change, and it's not going to happen. And the people that have said things like this are the Republican Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senator Ted Cruz, the Republican Senator Marco Rubio, the Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. These were among the Republicans whom today, of all days, on the day that John Lewis goes home, on the day that John Lewis went home, that you had who in the White House. I'm not going to even mention who it is. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Certainly on this day, I'm not going to mention. But the individual known as Individual One, on this day of days, deliberately floated that. And so far, every Republican, whether they are up for re-election or not, have spoken up loudly and clearly and pushed back in the spirit of John Lewis. Hell no. We are going to have an election on November the 3rd, 2020. And there is nothing that Individual One can do about that. Nothing. Not he, not the Attorney General, nobody. Congress is the ultimate arbiter, and Congress, as you obviously have heard just now from me, has spoken. I didn't even get to the Democrats. All of those individuals I just mentioned on the Republican side are presently in Congress, in the Senate. And I think their voices, particularly them, with all that they have done to hurt this country's infrastructure and lots more, if they are speaking up against Individual One, that's a start. Especially on this day. With that in mind, I want to now turn to the 2 states, Florida and Georgia. So for Florida voters, if you are listening right now to this, and if you know people in Georgia who are there and who need to get some help or whatever, if you know Georgia or Florida voters, but here in this case, Florida voters, please, you need to listen to this. You need to pass this on to them. Florida voters need to go to the following webpage, DOS, Dana, Omar, Samantha, dos.myflorida.com. That's dos.myflorida.com. /elections. dos.myflorida.com/elections. Once you type that web address in, you will come to a page that says Florida Division of Elections, and you will scroll down a little bit. You will see register to vote florida.gov. And it's fairly simple. It's very, very simple. You will see resources, helpful links, and upcoming events. And very, very simple stuff. You go below that, you see highlights. And you can go here as well and just look at those 2 tabs. One of them says voter registration information. And that would be for those of you who want to submit your registration, brand new registration online. If you find that you, for some reason, want to submit your voter registration and you want to register to vote, you go to exactly where I'm saying to go. Underneath where it says highlights on that site, as you scroll down, you will see on the left side, maybe halfway down the web page, highlights. And on the left side, it will say voter registration information. Click on that to register to vote. And there's a web address there. You can follow that. Next to it is, in the middle of the page, next to voter registration information, is the heading voter information. This is for those of you who want to check your registration. You voted before in Florida and you want to just make sure that you are still on the voting rolls. Now, especially in places like Florida and in Georgia, which I'm going to get to in a moment, you will want to check your voter registration. We know about the history of voter suppression in these states, but throughout the country, and particularly in Black and brown communities and Native American communities, it is pretty darn important. I can't stress how important it is that you do check your voter registration once a week, every week through the end of October. Very important, so that if you find that for some reason you're not showing up on the voter rolls, you can then re-register online and make sure that it is received. And keep checking. So you go to voter information if you want to go ahead and find out if you are in the voter rolls, if you're still there. You click on where it says voter information lookup, and you go from there, and it's straightforward. You see a web page with the title voter information lookup, and it's fairly straightforward from there. It's very straightforward, actually. So they even have on that web page as well, if you go back to dos.myflorida.com/elections, when you scroll down the page and you get to the highlights section on that home page, and you get to, on the left side underneath highlights, voter registration information, you will see underneath that something that says visit election dates for 2020 for the key upcoming dates. You click on that hyperlink for election dates for 2020 and it brings you to another page. I mean, this is Florida of all places, and it's quite clear and very easy. One of the easier, more straightforward websites, and everything is very clear. Very clear. In fact, for 2020, of course, as you know, the general election is on November 3rd. Now, there's a primary election in Georgia on August the 18th. The deadline to register for the primary election has now passed. The deadline to register for this November 3rd general election will be October the 5th. That is the deadline to register to vote. October the 5th is the last day for Florida voters to register to vote. So this is very important, folks. For those of you in Florida who are listening to this, or for those of you who know people in Florida, you please convey to them right now the deadline to register for the November 3rd general election is October the 5th in Florida. That's the deadline. Make sure that people register to vote now. Do not wait until October 5th. You can get some more information on that webpage. I can also tell you that the early voting period is available in Florida. Early voting does happen in Florida. And this year, early voting must be held for at least 8 days. That's by law. And so in Florida, for the primary election, if you are, hopefully you're registered for that in Florida, for the primary election, early voting is from August the 8th through August the 15th. That's the early voting for the primary election in Florida. And there are variations on that depending on the county supervisors of elections and which county supervisor that you are with. If you are a Florida voter, who is your supervisor of elections? Well, you've got to find out what your county is. Contact them and they'll tell you if they have additional dates beyond the ones I've just mentioned for the primary early voting. Now, for the general election for November 3rd, the early voting period in Florida is October the 24th through October the 31st, Halloween. Once again, I repeat, for Florida voters in your state, the early voting period for this November's general election on November 3rd, the early voting period is October 24th through October the 31st. Those are the mandatory dates. From October 24th through October 31st, you can vote early in the presidential election in Florida. Now again, there may be additional dates beyond the ones that I've just read out for October 24th through 31st. There may be additional early voting dates in Florida. But what you have to do is contact your county supervisor of elections to see if there are additional days of early voting for the general election. Very important. And that is the early voting period. So there you go. That's Florida. Really straightforward, though. I mean, that website is very, very clear. And there's phone numbers there. Florida Department of State, 850-245-6500. They have done a good job there in Florida, despite the fact that Florida has had a history, of course, of taking you off the rolls. But look, you can't let voter suppression stop you from doing what you need to do. Voter suppression and vote stealing is designed to discourage you from voting. It's designed to get you to say, well, my vote's not going to count anyway. That's what they want. They want you to have that idea. But your vote does count. Because if it didn't count, why would they work so hard to try to suppress it in the first place? Of course your vote counts. You have a very powerful tool in this country. In this country called the US of A, you have a very powerful tool. And that is to use your voice by going to the ballot box or by voting by mail and casting your vote. If you don't like what's happening in this country, then vote the people out who are doing what you do not like. Don't let any excuse stop you from doing that. Because believe me, the people in power who are destroying this country and who are making it a horrible place to be want you to give up. They want you to not vote. They want you to write in a candidate who has no chance. And any write-in of any candidate only helps the people who are destroying the country and who are destroying it right this moment. They will put every trick in the book, get a postmaster in who's slowing down the mail and destroying the post office, float this idea that the election is going to be delayed, not accept the results of that election, put stormtroopers on the streets all over the country in democratic voting cities, predominantly black and brown cities. They will do anything to prevent you from voting. They will let hundreds of thousands of people die of a virus, of a disease, to reduce the voting population. They will do anything. Tell you that you have to inject yourself with bleach. Tell you that you have to take a drug that has proven to be an absolute disaster and a killer. Even Herman Cain succumbed to this madness. They will tell you not to wear a mask. They will tell you to go about your business and sit with people and infect yourself. and get this coronavirus that Herman Cain passed away from today after going to that stupid rally in Tulsa, in a city that had coronavirus cases spiking through the roof, through the mountains. And he went there and sat there with no mask on, 74 years old, black man, the highest risk group possible, black, male, and 74 years old. No mask, no gloves, no physical distancing. Indoors, in an arena, 6,200 people. Granted, it wasn't the 20,000, but it was 6,200, and Herman Cain is now no longer here. I think it's time to give ignorance the boot this November. In fact, we can give ignorance the boot right now by educating people. So that's Florida. I want to go to Georgia right now. Georgia, if you want to, Georgia voters, those of you, if you want to get a jump on this, and I urge you to register to vote now, to check your registration, as I said, every week each week for all the weeks we have through the end of October here, because this is very important. If you are a Georgia voter, you want to listen to this right now. You go to SOS, Sam Oscar Sam, .ga.gov/elections. That's sos.ga.gov/elections. That takes you to the elections page. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, you'll see him smiling at you at the top of the page with the seal of the state, of the Secretary of State in the state of Georgia. And you will see as you scroll down, voter info, elections. This is very well cleared as well. This is a really good, clear, clean website. It's got some really good information. It has on the right-hand side, where it says elections, on the right-hand side of that, key election dates and information, register to vote. You go and click on the register to vote tab on the right-hand side. It's the third one down on the right. And you go from there. You just follow the prompts. It takes you to the online voter registration portal. You just follow those prompts. You see key election dates and information. And again, this is the beauty of these two websites, Florida and Georgia. Very, very clear. Very clear. It's very clear indeed. This is really good. And when you are taken to the online voter registration area, you've got two choices. Am I registered to vote, or I want to register to vote? They put them in the same place, which I think is terrific. Instead of having to go to a separate web page to go to the register to vote area versus the I want to check my registration area, they put them side by side. Who knew? This is exactly what every state should do to make it clearer to every voter. So this online voter registration in the state of Georgia online is terrific because it puts the two things side by side. Am I registered to vote? And I want to register to vote. So you just pick the one that applies to you. If you want to register to vote, well, you go and click on that. If you want to check your voter registration, you go to am I registered to vote? Can't be any simpler than that. Georgia's website might be the very best one that I have spoken about so far. The key dates and information page. This is all here. Election dates, 2020. And this is the beauty of this. Everything's very clear. Early voting in Georgia. Yep, there's early voting in Georgia as well. So pay attention to what I'm about to say. Early voting in Georgia begins on October the 12th. Early voting for this November's general election, to be clear, is October the 12th. Make a plan now for what you're going to be doing. I urge you, if you are someone who is still bold enough, brave enough and fearless enough to decide that you're going to still vote amidst the pandemic, please, October 12th is your earliest opportunity to do that in Georgia. And I hope you take advantage of it. If not, vote by mail. Every state is going to be mailing out ballots. And as you know, the Postmaster General is slowing down, with the help of Individual One, slowing down the mail. But still, do not be discouraged. Still vote by mail and check what's going on with it. Check with your Board of Elections. Sometimes these things take, according to what we've seen and what we've heard, what I've heard on Chris Hayes' show, and again last night he reported on this, the mail is being slowed down. That is happening. There are reports of it from postal workers who are doing this, who've been told to do it. Their bosses have ordered them to slow down and not sort the mail. So, I mean, this is actually happening, folks. So if you know that the mail's going to be 2 weeks in delay, you'd better mail your ballot out immediately if you plan to vote by mail. If you don't want to take that chance, go in person early. Do early voting. As I said, at least 38 states, if not more, maybe 40 states, have early voting. So be sure to take full advantage of early voting. I think that is the most important thing. Vote by mail by all means. Even with what's going on, vote by mail by all means. But my strongest recommendation is to vote early. Participate in early voting. The crowds, as I've talked about in prior episodes this week, crowds will be lesser. You won't have as many people. If you prepare exactly how you're going to be voting in terms of the ballot initiatives and everything else, if you have that written down at home before you go to the voting booth, then you're already ahead of the game. Then you don't have to stand in a voting booth for half an hour or an hour trying to figure everything out for the first time, which is why it's helpful to have voting guides, which most of these states' websites have. So there you have it for Georgia. It's really straightforward. Early voting in Georgia is October the 12th. The last day to register for the general election of November in Georgia is October 5th. So this is really easy. In Georgia, if you want to register to vote, you must do so no later than October the 5th of this year for the November general election. And I would urge you to register to vote now, and I've just told you how you go about doing that online. And the best way to register to vote in any state is to do so online. Not at the DMV, not at anywhere else. Do it online. Why? Because the Secretary of State's office is the official place, or the Board of Elections office, the County Board of Elections, or the Secretary of State. These are the official areas to register to vote. Do it online, please. I mean, at this stage, if you have a computer and web app and web access, online access, please do it online with internet access, please. I know there'll be people who will try to register you to vote, but online, if you've got access to a computer and internet, do it online. It's the best, quickest, easiest, and safest way, quite frankly. Plus, there's a paper trail. And you can make that paper trail by taking screenshots of what you've done. So there you go with Georgia. October the 5th is the deadline to register to vote for the November 3rd general election. Please do not wait until October 5th. Go register now, please. Thank you very much indeed for listening. And I will be posting those links in the liner notes to this episode. Thanks again for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.